On August 26, the separatists of southern Yemen announced the suspension of the talks with the government settled in Riyadh in the framework of the Agreement of Power Sharing within the executive, facilitated by Saudi Arabia in November last year, after accusing their rivals of violating the ceasefire. We expect the brothers of the coalition, led by Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, to act actively against the forces that are obstructing this agreement, represented by the Muslim Brothers, who control the decision of legitimacy. The government of Yemen must stop the mobilization and must withdraw its forces from the southern governorates, especially from Shakra, where the Yemeni army continues to violate the ceasefire. But let's remember how Saudi Arabia and the United States reacted after the agreement was reached last November, now broken by the Southern Yemeni Transition Council. This agreement will open the door to future agreements with Yemeni factions so that we can reach a political settlement that will end the crisis and protect and strengthen Yemen from anyone who does not have the best interest of Yemen and its various factions. We welcome the agreement between the government of the Republic of Yemen and the Southern Transition Council to promote the terms of the Riyadh Agreement, which will pave the way for a unified government that can counter the Houthi aggression. We urge all parties to implement the terms of the agreement and support the efforts of the UN Special Envoys to negotiate a political settlement throughout the country. The conflict in Yemen is largely due to the illegal arms transfer from the Islamic Republic of Iran to the Houthis. Therefore, the U.S. is submitting a resolution to the UN Security Council to extend the arms embargo to Iran. The mission of the Security Council is to maintain international peace and security. The Council would mock that mission by allowing the number one state sponsor of terrorism to buy as well weapons freely. Iran repeatedly uses terrorist activities and weapons from the regional militia, brought from Hezbollah in Lebanon and through the Houthis in Yemen, the Palestinian terrorists in Gaza, etc. Iran is undermining stability in the region. And this is what followers of the Houthis rebels consider, the ones who control the capital Sana'a and other Yemeni locations. We are sending a message to the American and Israeli enemy, also to the Saudis and the United Arab Emirates, to those who support them, and to all the mercenaries. We will win, since we are the students of Imam Hussein. The most important thing about our meeting is to commemorate the day when the enemy wanted to wipe out our Islamic community, which for us represents the sacrifice, the resistance, and the path. But let's see what the agreement signed between the government of Mansour Hadi and the Separatist Transition Council of Southern Yemen is about. The Transition Council of Southern Yemen is an executive institution of a separatist nature. It was self-proclaimed in May 2017 by Idris al-Zubadi in the context of the armed conflict. This pseudo-executive institution, for having made a pact with the government based in Riyadh, is not recognized by the international community. Its members represent the 5 southern governorates and 2 government ministers, who support the re-establishment of the former nation of southern Yemen. The peace agreement, known as the Riyadh Agreement, was signed in November of last year by representatives of the Yemeni executive and the Southern Transition Council, with the mediation of Saudi Prince bin Salman, the Crown Prince Abu Dhabi, Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, and in the presence of the deposed President Abu Dhabi Mansour Al Hadi. According to the Zeba news agency, this agreement stipulates within 30 days the formation of a technocratic executive with 24 departments to be divided equally between the northern and southern provinces of the country. On the military level, the forces loyal to Mansour Hadi and the Transnational Council deployed in Aden, Haibat, and Zauba must withdraw to their initial positions and remove all heavy weapons from the city that serves as the seat of the transnational government. According to the pact, these camps should receive in 1 month all the troops of both sides deployed in Aden. Only a brigade of the Presidential Guard would be in charge of the protection of the main institutions and signatory parts. Similarly, all military information should be under the control of Yemen Ministry of Defense and Interior. According to separatists, forces allied to the government have attacked the southern province of Abyei. They claim executive forces have committed 356 fire violations, killing at least 75 members of the Southern Transitional Council forces and injuring many others in their joint statement. The Southern Transitional Council is supported by the United Arab Emirates, while the executive is supported by Saudi Arabia. Since 2015, the four are part of the right-sponsored international coalition fighting the Houthis rebels, supported by Iran. I invite you to check some digital information. Let's see aerial press. The new governor of Aden province arrives in Yemen after being sworn in by the president in Saudi Arabia. Ahmed Habib Lamlas, the new governor of Aden province, where the internationally recognized capital of the Yemeni government is located, arrived in Yemen on Thursday after being sworn in by Yemeni President Abrabu Mansour Hadi in Saudi Arabia. Lamlas, who was appointed new governor 2 weeks ago, was the Secretary General of the Southern Transitional Council. So the decision seeks to bring positions closer together between the Yemeni government and the separatists in the south. His designation largely seeks to consolidate an agreement between the CTS and the government reached last year. His arrival comes day after CTS said that talks with the government for the formation of a new cabinet, including ministers representing the south and north of Yemen, had been suspended. Also, let's see Emirates News Agency. Yemen, an aid ship from the United Arab Emirates arrived at Al Mukalla port. An aid ship from the United Arab Emirates carrying food and school supplies has arrived in the port of Al Mukalla in Yemen in support of the people of Hadramaut. The gesture is part of the Emirates Maritime Relief Bridges through its humanitarian arm, the UAE Red Crescent, which has launched several relief, development and health projects in support of Yemen and its people. The beneficiaries thank the Emirates and the Red Crescent for their continued efforts in the country, delivering thousands of tons of food and relief aid to alleviate their suffering. And finally, let's check what brings the Deutsche Welle. First direct commercial flight took off between Israel and the United Arab Emirates. The first commercial flight between Israel and the United Arab Emirates left Tel Aviv on Monday with advisors to U.S. President Donald Trump and Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to finalize the formalization agreement to be signed in Washington in the coming weeks. Jared Kushner, Trump's advisor and son-in-law, is leading the Israeli-American delegation that will shape the establishment of diplomatic relations between Israel and the United Arab Emirates. The delegation includes 7 work teams to define the opening of embassies, cooperation in tourism and culture, science and investment, among others. This is a historic flight, and we hope it will be the beginning of an even more historic journey to the Middle East. Kushner said before a takeoff on a runway floated with Israeli and American flags, as we were able to see in the photograph that brings the German agency Deutsche Welle. Now I'd like to suggest to you the reading of an article titled "Yemen is not the Emirates. Israeli flag will never be raised here." It's been written by Mox Kazib Zadem and published on the Hispan TV digital site on August 28th. Secret Friends. It seems that Israeli media are very interested in what is happening in southern Yemen. The local newspaper Israel Hayom indicated in a report that a new state was formed in West Asia, which will be Israel's new secret friend. The media revealed that Tel Aviv regime is holding secret meetings with the government of southern Yemen, headed by Aidarus al-Zubaydi. This information was confirmed by the website Intelligence Online in its report published on July 22nd that the Yemeni CTS has expressed its willingness to establish relations with Israel to achieve economic and security objectives. Yemen's importance to Israel. The researchers say that the Zionist entity has managed to establish itself in the Horn of Africa by building a military base in Eritrea, a fact that it wants to repeat on the Yemeni island of Socotra, with the support of the United Arab Emirates. Now it seems that the Emirates are paving the way in Socotra for the Tel Aviv regime to erect a military site on the island, and in return, Israel has asked Abu Dhabi to allow the CTS to control the southern areas of Yemen. There is a mercenary named Hani bin Barak, a Wahhabi sheikh and vice president of the so-called CTS forces, who congratulated the United Arab Emirates on the normalization of its relations with the Zionist regime, in addition to expressing his willingness to travel to the occupied territories. The Emirates and their mercenaries in southern Yemen knew for sure that the Yemeni people would oppose rapprochement with Israel, so they encouraged their lackeys to raise the Israeli flag in the southern cities of Yemen. A man raised the Israeli flag on one of the cars in the city of Crater, in the province of Aden. The purpose of such an initiative was to present the Yemenis of southern Yemen as supporters to the normalization of ties with the Tel Aviv regime. The Emirates made a big mistake in asking bin Barak to approve the normalization of relations with Israel, since such a measure will endanger the Emirates troops in Yemen, since for Yemenis of all ethnicities, whether Sunni or Shia, rich or poor, the city of Al-Quds, Jerusalem, and the Palestinian cause are considered a red line, and in this sense, the usurpers of Islamic sanctuaries will always be considered enemies. Let's locate on the map the Arab nation on which we are focusing our analysis today.
Yemen,
Arab country balkanized by the war. After the unification of the Arab Republic of Yemen, North Yemen, and the Democratic People's Republic of Yemen, South Yemen in 1919, the current Republic of Yemen emerged. The Northern Republic achieved its independence in 1918 with the disintegration of the Ottoman Empire. South Yemen was born in 1967 after its liberation from British colonial rule. It is a bicontinental country located in the Near East and next to the continental platform of Africa. Its Asian part is located in the Mashkar, south of the Arabian Peninsula, surrounded by the Arabian Sea, the Gulf of Aden, and the Red Sea. It shares borders with Oman and Saudi Arabia. Its capital and most populated city is Sana'a. It is the only republican state of the peninsula, and its surface consists of 527,968 square kilometers. Yemen is a nation with reduced income, based its economy on oil exports, responsible for 25% of its gross domestic product and 70% of the total income in the state's coffers. It is an exporter of natural gas since 2009. Mainly Muslim, the total population is Arab, and their society is strongly tribal, with about 400 saved tribes in the north and a group of hereditary castes in urban areas. Since 2015, Saudi Arabia leads an international coalition that undertakes military action against the Republic of Yemen. According to a report by the Egg Project, the war was left an estimated 91,600 dead. As a result of the armed conflict, the nation has suffered a gradual balkanization and has left the warring factions under territorial control. The Southern Transnational Council controls most of southern Yemen, with partial control of the Abyad and Aden governorates. The Houthis have almost total control of the northwest of the country, with Saddam and Sana'a, the capital, as its main strongholds. The deposed president, Abdel Rabul Mansour Halabi, proposed by right, controls most of the territory in the northeast of the country. For their part, Al-Qaeda, Aqba, and self-titled Islamic State terrorist groups have taken hold in population strongholds, while threatening to further expand their legacy and terror on the rest of the country. Now, let's update more information with our correspondent, Leonette Cruz Pareta from Cairo, Egypt.
Thanks, colleague. A greeting for you and for all the viewers of Telesur.
Yemen was one of the countries that opposed the agreement of normalization of relations between United Arab Emirates and Israel, although not unanimously, because the country is divided into several rival factions, some of them fighting under a coalition agreement. In the capital, Sana'a, the group of Houthis rejected this agreement of normalization. Their main leader, Abdi Mali Ajudi, reiterated his support for the Palestinian cause and said that Israel, the Zionist enemy, is the enemy of the Islamic community. While in Adem, the alternative capital, the internationally recognized government reiterated its support for the Palestinians and its commitment to the solution of two independent states, with Jerusalem as the capital of Palestine. However, the Southern Transition Council, which is another important faction in Yemen, and which controls several of the country's southern cities, welcomed this agreement and their allies of the United Arab Emirates Kingdom. And precisely this Southern Transition Council controls other important cities in the country, such as the island of Socotra, which has great strategic value for countries like the United States, as well as the United Arab Emirates and Israel. A report published by the French media Jota Forum indicated that a delegation of Emirate and Israeli intelligence officers visited the island and toured several places to install in them spy bases. In this way, they could gather electronic information from the south of Yemen, from the Persian Gulf, also from the Gulf of Aden, the Strait of Bab, and the Horn of Africa. So they could monitor the movements of the group of Houthis and also the naval movements of Iran in the region, as well as control air and sea traffic south of the Red Sea. Another strategic place of interest for these countries that we already mentioned is precisely the Gulf of Aden, as it is one of the main maritime routes for transporting the oil production of the Persian Gulf. There are several interests at stake in these internal disputes in Yemen that feed the war, as we said, geopolitical, geostrategic interests, and those who suffer are the Yemeni population. More than 91,000 have died in this war-like war, and about 20 million. 81% of the population needs urgent humanitarian aid according to UN figures. Back to you in the studio. Thank you, Leonette. Let's take our first break in a critical move. Remember, there's a strategic move in social media for you to participate. Israel is accelerating steps to settle in an area of southern Yemen with the mediation of the United Arab Emirates. Will it be in order to achieve peace in the Middle East, as Tel Aviv, Abu Dhabi, and Washington, D.C. promised in their recent agreement? Let's take a short break. We'll be back soon. Since 2014, although some people also talk about 2011, Yemen has been the scene of an armed conflict that has triggered one of the worst humanitarian crises in the country. Let's make a brief timeline with the main events that have marked this war. The war in this Arab country has its roots in the misnamed Arab Spring of 2011, when an uprising forced President Ali Abdullah Saleh to leave power in the hands of his vice president, Abdrabbu Mansur Hadi, to face a crisis situation due to corruption, food insecurity, in addition to the continuous attacks by terrorist groups. At the end of 2014, President Mansur Hadi and his executive installed themselves in Saudi Arabia, after the coup promoted by Houthi militias. The conflict escalated in March 2015 when Riyadh, leading a coalition with the United Arab Emirates, United States, United Kingdom and France, launched airstrikes against Houthi rebels with the aim of restoring the government of Mansour Hadi. Since November 2016, Saudi Arabia maintains an air, land and sea blockade against Yemen, a measure that has aggravated the humanitarian situation. On the other hand, in 2017, the Southern Transition Council was created in Aden, supported by United Arab Emirates. This faction promotes the separation of Yemen from the southern territories controlled by the Houthis. Since the escalation, the Yemeni government accuses the United Arab Emirates of providing financial and military support to the southern separatists. It also demands that the Abu Dhabi stop initiating the fragmentation of the country. At the end of last year, the government of Mansour Hadi and separatists of the Transition Council of the South signed a so-called right agreement with the objective of putting an end to the armed conflict through the distribution of powers within the executive. Last week, the southern separatists announced the end of the agreement with the government. The situation means a new stage of tension in the Arab nation. We start the analysis in a critical move. We have from Spain Juan Luis González Perez, international analyst, and from Argentina Jorge, journalist specialist in issues of Middle East. Welcome both of you to our critical move. Juan Luis, with his view from Europe, he surely will help us to understand what direct relationship there is between the signing of the normalization agreement between the United Arab Emirates and Israel, and this movement that has been observed during the last weeks, especially in the south of Yemen. Well, everybody knows that the main construction of this situation between Israel and United Arab Emirates has been the United States, which represents part of a resignation of the deal of the century, and that's how it tried to sell to the public opinion. But despite that, all the things that has emerged within, this is an agreement that already existed before. And same thing is going to happen with Saudi Arabia. Sorry, when bin Salman takes over all the power. And this supposes an authentic betrayal to the Arab causes, because agreement that back, if I do try recall back to the 72, countries would go back to normalize relations with Israel and in the border before to the wars of the 77. So the agreements, which are the base of the initiative of the peace agreement, like 2 or 3 years ago, so it's completely despised Palestine. We cannot forget that Israel is occupying illegally where the mosque of Grecia is, which is the third place most important for Muslims. So what's going on here is that the South Transition Council is not considered by the international community. It doesn't have any strength yet, and it pretends that Israel to give it, because Israel turned to the United States, and what does the interest to Israel from this council? Well, as I said before, is that incredible island of Socotra, which is a natural paradise with no comparison in the world. It's a place where they can continue to monitor and watching over Iran. And it's so, one way or another, they get the island of Socotra. That way they could have Iran under control. So basically, what we see here, it's a little bit the geopolitical interest they have. So this is how it will be. Let me introduce into the dialogue to Jorge. The Southern Transition Council, as Jean-Louis has very well stated, is not recognized at the international level, but it shows itself to be a key player in favor of Israel. Is that part of the Middle East? Well, obviously, Yemeni people have lost their security. This is one of the most serious humanitarian crises that we can see right now over the face of the earth. What they do is they try to take over their resources and relate it to the international traffic. And now we see that it appears more clearly one of the objectives from Israel related to the United Arab Emirates, just in order to escalate the power behind North America in this region, because Arab Emirates and also United States. But the true fact is that they're just trying to take over the control of Yemen, to take over all of their natural resources. They're interested not only in the geographic area, but also in other areas, to take over the Islamic Republic of Iran. So they try to boycott new chance agreements from the United Nations. Let's say the liberation of, and also the confrontation and the opening of an airport. So, but these conflicts are way too far from being resolved. So this is a very critical situation, because they're facing such a huge humanitarian crisis. And we need to add on top of all these things the situation that they are increasing on the other hand. So truly the situation is very serious. So we might see the attempt by the United States and Israel, alongside with the Arab Emirates, taking advantage of this crisis. Talking about taking advantage of the crisis, it is not suspicious to you that in this that is fair in this context that representatives of the South Transition Council announced that more than 300 violations, ceasefire violations. Now, why now, after this pact is signed? And I ask myself the question as well, because we see that just in this context, the United Arab Emirates responds by sending a shipment of humanitarian aid to that part of the country. And in parallel comes the son-in-law and advisor of President Trump, which is the main link between Washington and Tel Aviv to United Arab Emirates. So there are lines of connection that are worth joining, right? Yes, that's right. It's very clear that the United States, the Emirates, and the Zionist State of Israel are the ones who are functioning behind all this. So in order to create here a pro-American and facing the resistance that Iran is pushing. So obviously there's going to be a popular protest here. As it's been said before, Yemeni sides, Palestine and other movements that support the cause. And the war, this truly produces states and inside the population of this suffered country. Thank you, Jorge. Well, Luis, what Jorge has just said serves to me to formulate practically two questions within one. Would it be so easy for the state of Israel and its ally, the United States, and in the case of the Gulf monarchies. The United Arab Emirates, to have the presence of the Zionist state in that area of the southern Yemen, taking into account the position that parties and social organizations of that part of the southern part of the Arab nation have already expressed that are against the normalization of these two countries, the relationship between these two countries, but they are also against the presence of Israel in southern Yemen or on the island of Socotra. On the other hand, that will it be so easy for it to take possession there, taking into account the second element, the Houthis, will they stay just like that without doing anything? Well, it's not going to be easy, especially because practically all Arab countries are against Israel. And besides, because they have made it perfectly clear during demonstrations in the streets. So not even the Yemeni people. We also see all the mercenaries and a lot of other countries. Not only for now, we have seen it in other times. People who have been fighting to take over the south. So it is the same as always. So it will be like going a little bit overhead and see the rejection of most of the people from some parties. And the causes that has linked somehow all the Arab population or the Arab people. So if they just want to take over and take the control of more and more territories each time. So that's why we see the air bombing from the coalition. Or it's like they're just trying to demonstrate the strength. And not only they are allowing to resist themselves, but not only from the south and from the east. They are even attacking territories of Saudi Arabia. So the French government has stated out that what they're doing there is something which is savage. So they're going through one of the most big crises that the world have ever seen. All of this that we can see what is going on there right now. We see how many people are just dying of starvation. All these things are always provoked by the war. Another thing is that Israel seems like it is anticipating the island of Socotra. They already have decided where they're going to put this base. At the entrance of the Arabic Sea to the entrance of the Red Sea. And they're doing this directly with their allies. So the council has seen that so a big part of the population that comes from this area of Socotra. So we need to pay attention to this. We need to study this situation. With Israel, which is what they're doing. But it's not going to be easy. Not from the side of the Yemeni population. So a big part of the armies are with the Houthis. So this is going to be really hard to do. Thank you so much, Luis, and I also thank Jorge for your time for our critical move. See you soon. Now, let's take another break. Remember, there is a strategic move in social media for you to participate with us. Israel is accelerating steps to settle in an area of southern Yemen with the mediation of the United Arab Emirates. Will it be in order to achieve peace in the Middle East, as Tel Aviv, Abu Dhabi, and Washington DC promised in their recent agreement? Stay with us. We'll be back soon. Predominate around the besieged Yemen. How does Israel enter the geopolitical board of this Arab nation? Let's review the context. As we have explained, Yemen shares borders with Oman and Saudi Arabia. Its location in the extreme south of Asia, surrounded by the Arabian Sea, the Gulf of Aden, and the Red Sea, is of vital importance for world trade, since around 10% of the world's oil destined for the West passes through these maritime routes. The military intervention in that country, led by Saudi Arabia since 2015, and with the support of United Arab Emirates and Western powers, has given the conflict an international transcendence and has become a clear scenario of dispute. The air and naval blockade that Saudi Arabia and its allies maintain against any shipment of humanitarian aid that does not come from their own coalition has a double background. According to analysts, this limits the supply capacity of their military enemies on the one hand, and on the other, it restricts to a minimum of contacts of the external suppliers with the Houthi militias. During the last 5 years, the mediation of right around Yemen is related to the objective of establishing itself as the new leader of the Arab world. In addition, it is an ally of the United States, as has been Israel. Activist political parties and organizations in southern Yemen expressed their opposition to Washington's announcements about the agreement to normalize relations between the United Arab Emirates and Israel. Let's not forget that the Emirates are keeping areas in southern Yemen under control, mainly the Aden province. It is in this context that the opposition denounces that, with the reestablishment of links with the Zionist state, Abu Dhabi intends to promote a Tel Aviv intervention in that area of the Arab nation, which could further endanger the security of the territory. And this last thing is what I will use to formulate my following question to Nicola Hardwa, an international analyst, specialist in Middle East issues. Welcome, Nicola. How far is Abu Dhabi willing to go on this journey of consortium with Israel regarding Yemen? It's nice to greet you, Ray. We need to go back a little bit back in time to see, to remember that there is oil wells and the intention of being exploited by Emirates. That explains the difference between Saudi Arabia and Arab Emirates. Mainly in the Emirates, we have a very narrow relationship with United States and Israel, which has signified to submit to a labor which is completely miserable, which is to try to create a government in the south of Yemen with the objective of having a control over Baden-Baden, which United States have already tried to do it years ago. Let's remember 1993, when they tried to do something similar in the Horn of Africa. So on one hand, the possibility of Israel, and on the other hand, let's not forget that other element, which is it's trying to get in China, because China goes through the Gulf of Chabahar. Also, so goes out through the port of Chabahar and gets to the Indies and to the rest of the world, making that route only in 30 days, which makes it so much important for the commerce of this country. Thank you, Nicola. And speaking about routes, a route that goes right through the south of Yemen, crossing the Gulf of Aden, entering the Red Sea, then through Egypt, connecting it with the Mediterranean. That was the route that followed with their oil ships in aid of Venezuela. Any relation, something to see with this thing that's happening now, has anything to do with what happened just a few months ago? Is this strategic relationship between two nations, two non-allied nations? Well, as always, you are very right. about these aspects. In this concrete case, we need to agree that United States does not go anywhere around where there is no oil. So the Emirates' objective is the same one of keep on drowning Venezuela. As I said, it intends to drown Iran, also China, and also has tried to do the same thing with Venezuela. Right. In a matter of their possessions. So they're trying to look for a mean trader, other traders at the Yemeni police, which are through this attempt of the government of South, doing it as always, because always in order to take over these resources, as in the same case of Venezuela, they also look for traders who can sell them and surrender to just give up the control of, and especially in this case, the oil. But indirectly, the United States would be admitting its defeat, because let's not forget that at the time, it launched a whole campaign based on fake news, saying that it had intercepted the Iranian ships and that it had sanctioned, which recent history has shown to be untrue. So now it anchors itself in this relationship driven by the United States itself, obviously. With Israel and the United Arab Emirates, it is practically instructing Tel Aviv to do in the area what Washington was not able to do in the Caribbean. Of course, exactly. Just what happens is that the United States have given $3,000 million annually for them to serve their interests. So, for them to fulfill this role in the Middle East, that is what is going on. And the fact is that, firstly, they're not going to take over Yemen. In the area where they intend to settle, the Republic of Southern Yemen, which is an absolutely left-wing government, anti-imperialist, had a coalition with the United Arab Emirates, and they were able to crash and were able to make a government. But after the discovery of the huge discovery of soil, well, they discovered that it was very interesting to divide the country in two parts and to take over the strong part, where are all the maritime resources and also the energetic resources, in this case the oil and also the gas that you can find in the south of Yemen. So United States, when they try then to fulfill this job, they're doing it by forcing the puppets they have, the traders they have, in this case the United Arab Emirates. So we could believe that the United Arab Emirates, they just don't have anything. They are the third largest buyers of weapons in the world, and they do not have capacity. Truth is that right now they try to take over the control over Yemen, to take over the oil control. That is why that there is a division between them. And this puppet, which is United Arab Emirates, which is the only Arab puppet who is willing to give up its will for transnational companies to use them, who has Zionist capitals. So you say they will take control of southern Yemen. Do you consider their initiative will bear fruit? No, the control, they're not going to get it ever. Not even Israel, not even the United States. United States as well as Israel. Let's not forget there is a military base, secret base in Colombia. They do the same. United States has military bases and troops in Colombia. But in order to initiate an aggression against Venezuela, they need traders and puppets to the serve of Venezuela. But Venezuela is not willing to surrender or to give up. So same thing happens in the Arab world. There also you can find traitors, people who betray their country. So it is the same thing. The scenario is exactly the same situation. But to dominate Venezuela, that I would say that would be impossible. So it is also impossible when it comes to Yemen. They will try to do it. They will try to get as much traitors over as they can in order to fulfill those interests, which are not other than to say the American imperialism, which is going down, and that mainly in this case it's at stake, as I said, the fights also with China, and because this war also is headed to Iran, China, and Venezuela as well. So there are many factors in stake, and for that reason, with the exception of Telesur, which is an amazing informative agency and has a big audience and a huge capacity to analyze as well as you do it. I always listen to all your thoughts. So I was saying, with the exception of Telesur and your program, the rest of Latin America, we only hear fake news. Because the only thing that they do is just making fool of themselves with the analysis they do. But they do that, and that is what they are trying to do. They're trying to shut up Venezuela. And that is why also in Chile, a country which is trying to get alongside with the United States, and it's being left behind just because of the fact of telling the truth. And finally going back to Middle East, back to Arab Emirates, it's not going to take over the south of Yemen. It's not going to do it. So I would say that very soon they will try to go down one after another. Well then, we will be at the expectation. Thank you very much for these reflections for Telesur. See you soon. Thank you. Let's go to conclusions. International allies, either from the Emirates side or from the Saudi side, which translated into the language of the West means the United States and Israel, are preparing to consolidate the bastion in the south of Yemen. What is the purpose? To anchor the Zionist state at that point in the Arabian Peninsula and to remain beyond the plundered Palestine in the search for peace in the Middle East? A new obstacle to the sovereign flow of the unredeemed Iran and the booming China? In parallel, how will the Houthis and the rest of the forces participating in a war that has been going on for more than 6 years and that, little by little, without taking in consideration the will of the Yemeni people, has divided a nation? The question invites us not to divert our gaze from that strategic area. For today, we close the geopolitical board.